For those that don't know me, I'm a professional clairvoyant. I've been doing it since my adolescence. I have training, but I also have it in my genetics to be able to see energy, see spirit. And I've always had unusual dreams, and as my clairvoyance was awakening, these vision dreams started to happen. And I distinctly remember the first one dreaming about watching TV and seeing an earthquake in LA and waking up the next day and thinking it was so real and spending all day searching the news for that earthquake, and yet nothing had happened. And a few months later, that exact earthquake, the Northwood earthquake, manifested. I had a vision of Malibu fires. So those kinds of awakenings are kind of what showed me that I was psychic, and then I got training, and then I've been doing it as a professional my entire life. In the late 90s, I had another period of visions about the future, one after another, hundreds actually, and then I wrote most of them down, and they showed me a series of events to happen for America, for the world. And it's never been something that works as promotion as a professional clairvoyant. As a professional clairvoyant, I work with people. I help them through their personal crises. I'm a healer. So talking about the end of the world with people, it doesn't really market yourself, so it's not something that I generally like to talk about. It's very personal to me, and I've kept it really close to my heart. In fact, I really have shared most of it as myself on your show. And so recently, especially with the Japanese earthquake and what you mentioned with the increase in solar activity, there's been a series of visions that have shown me that the predictions that I've seen during those 90s visions are really starting to happen. So it's activated me a little bit here.
All right. Where would you like to begin in terms of the visions? For those that don't know, I contacted Leon several years ago because I came across something that he posted on his website. And the word I want to use is synchronicity. A couple years ago, I started encountering the synchronicity more and more of people that have had some of the same dreams, some of the same visions. And Leon, where would you like to begin with this?
Well, I know we've talked, or you've talked a lot about China and upcoming wars and things that are going on, and one of my visions started out with wars. Now, mind you, this was before 9/11, but I had a vision of a nuclear terrorist explosion in New York. Now, we did not have a nuclear terrorist explosion, but there was clearly a massive terrorist explosion that happened in New York that changed the world forever. And in those visions, it showed the war machines waking up, the American war machine waking up, as well as Russian and Chinese war machines waking up. And this period where America would get away with war after war after war after war until they can't get away with that anymore. And so I've watched that unfold. I've been watching Chinese military develop. I've been watching them form alliances with Russia. I've been watching these visions unfold in a very non-dramatic way. It's happening diplomatically. It's not so much of an explosion in your face yet. And so that's definitely one space. Some of these visions that have covered natural disasters have been real simple. I can just go off the list and most of them focus on America. I think that's because I'm American and I live here and I keep my attention on America and staying safe, so I tend to see events like that. So I've seen several earthquakes, 7.0 in the San Francisco Bay Area, followed 3 months later by an 8.0 earthquake. These earthquakes are very crippling. It's not going to help us on the economic levels at all. It's going to make things worse. I've seen other earthquakes, a 6.5 earthquake in New York and a 6.5 in San Diego, and also volcanic eruptions in Seattle. So clearly more volcanic activity. There was one vision where I was actually on an extraterrestrial ship, and these beings were explaining these visions to me and what I was seeing. And they made a point of pointing out the sun and showing the increased solar activity that was occurring during this time when these things would start unfolding. And they were saying quite clearly that solar activity was linked directly to earthquakes on Earth, that those solar flares, when they flow off, they're not just affecting Earth, they do affect all the planets in the solar system. Another reason why I'm kind of alerted to this. And the point that you mentioned of watching a flare hit the Earth and the Japanese earthquake pop off. Japan, I had one very specific vision of that, and it took place over a series of years. And when I started that vision, Japan had already fallen. It had been abandoned by people. You could clearly see, or I could clearly see, homes that had slid off their foundations, villages abandoned, fires off here and there. Mm-hmm. And I remember seeing Chinese military people on the continent looking for people, securing the area. And I remember watching them being very terrified of what had happened in Japan, and especially while they were checking houses and homes. That vision flashed back to before Japan fell, when it was highly populated, and that's when the earthquakes start coming and start slamming Japan. Now, there would be no way for me, well, maybe, but at the time there would be no way to realize how damaging these earthquakes are. I don't know if I would have believed
now, Leon,
it.
Don't you find it interesting, I know I do, at how for years in Japanese comic books, anime, there's been this plot of a zombie apocalypse that follows some sort of nuclear meltdown of some sort of a plant where the radiation causes people to become zombie-like. That's very startling, given that in our own society, especially in Portland, there is a massive obsession with what is called the zombie apocalypse.
Well, you know, we're all very, very psychic. So, I mean, look at Godzilla. He doesn't breathe fire. He has radioactive breath, and he's born from radiation, and that's been an icon for Japan forever. We're all very psychic. That argument goes from fiction or nonfiction. Nonfiction is written to be based on reality. Fiction is fantasy made up on our heads. But if everyone's psychic, everyone's clairvoyant, people do tap into their clairvoyance, and they might be telling a story, but it's something that they're picking up, that they're sensing. We see that in all forms of media and art and human expression, really.
Yeah, and it manifests itself in language. It's also called the collective unconscious, or the zeitgeist of the ages.
Right.
Well,
right, exactly.
You know, when people discuss China and the future, it provokes a lot of very strong opinions in people. And I've heard many people say the United States will never be invaded by a foreign country. It cannot happen. It will not happen. It is logistically impossible. The reason why I find this to be fascinating, the idea that this could happen, that we're onto something here, is simply looking at every single administration that we've had giving China top secret military technology, missile technology transfers that has happened illegally without approval of Congress for many, many years. And this is a story that both the controlled left and right should be aware of. Now, you don't necessarily see a particular timeline to this, or when or what year it's going to happen, but as I recall from the last interview, you noted that this event that comes to this continent happens after these natural disasters.
Right. I really see it starting with what's happened in Japan. Japan's going to continue to fall apart, and then once America gets hit with a good-sized disaster, especially money-making epicenter like the San Francisco Bay Area just being taken out overnight, and then add a few more on top of it. And the money problem that's gone on. I mean, to me, just clairvoyantly looking at America and the U.S. dollar and its value, it's worthless. It's all a big joke. I mean, everyone's just propping this stuff up, holding back the collapse, but it's really worthless. And one of my predictions is the collapse of the U.S. dollar, where it is worthless, where people will burn it in a fireplace just to get the fire started. And it's the Chinese that come in and reform global currency, and China's currency will be what dominates and takes over American currency. So this happening is part of that. That's always been one big argument why China would never attack America, because they own us, and that's just a ridiculous excuse.
But one of the ideas that could be explored here when we say attack America is the potential that they could be called in to quell civil unrest within the United States when a turbulent situation is already going on internally within our own country. That is to say, the possibility that peacekeepers could be called in or invited into the country to deal with what that which controls our government calls domestic terrorists. But again, I'm just mentioning this as a possibility.
And that's how my visions have shown the Chinese, and that's how they spin it with their propaganda to promote themselves to the rest of the world. They are peacekeepers. They are coming in to bring order to chaos. But the definition of that can get really out of whack. They may have to do that in Japan. I definitely see them in there, and they may have to do that here. But some of those arguments are also about American wealth. Russia gets involved here, and it's about Americans hoarding wealth and keeping it from the rest of the world while most of the world's population goes without food, water, and shelter.
Right.
You have America, who's the wealthiest country, keeping it all, bankrupting it, throwing everything into chaos. That becomes a major issue, and also America's war history of just constant war after another. So part of peacekeeping is stopping the Americans from what they're doing, raping the earth. So that can start out with really good intentions, oh, we're here to help, but the argument can get really quite out of whack.
Right, and there are some people that would welcome the Chinese, believing that is a better system. For those that are watching this show that are hearing this for the very first time, this idea that this could happen, there is some information, some data, some facts that you can look up while the web is still up and operational. Take a look at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is the alliance between China and Russia, where the common enemy is the United States. Also take a look at Idaho, at the governor, Butch Otter, welcoming the Chinese to build a massive technological self-contained city. I know you've read about this, Leon. And so these things that you're saying seem less far-fetched as time goes on.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm surprised people don't really see it. I think the big problem with the end of the world is people's personal perception and people's personal beliefs and people's personal realities. And so as the world is changing, it's not just external. It's not just going to be a war or an earthquake or this or that that's going to make people wake up and change. It's stuff happening inside people right now. People either losing their homes or money's not working. Things that used to work just aren't working anymore. And it feels like the end of the world. It's really just an old way of existing falling apart. But it's happening to us individually, but it's starting to show itself in the greater scope of it, the planet. So, the biggest problem are people being unconscious to this, not being aware of it. I remember specifically when war breaks out on American soil, Americans don't believe war could ever happen here. They've never seen it other than a civil war. Our generations don't even know what that's like unless they've joined the military and gone and been involved in war. People at home here don't really know what that's like. And
Okay.
I distinctly recall that no one had any idea who was shooting at us. Missiles start showering down on the East Coast, hitting government installations. People start flipping out, see this on TV, and they don't even understand the world enough to understand who's attacking us and why they're attacking us.
Okay, you mentioned Russia being involved in this. In the past interviews, you mentioned the East Coast primarily, where the Russians were coming in. I'm sure Alaska is going to be a hot spot as well. What cities do you think are going to be most at risk, and where do you see some of the potential safe areas?
Well, I want to say there's the war stuff that I've seen, there's a lot of safe things. There's rules of nuclear war, and there's only 3 countries that are going to use nuclear weapons, and America is not one of them. So there's never going to be a nuclear detonation. I know people have had visions of that. That's why I mentioned me also having visions of that in New York. Well, there was a terrorist explosion, but in a dream, it was told more of a story to see this nuclear, the most scariest kind of explosion that triggers the world into a new cycle of advancement. So I know lots of people out there listening have had visions of nuclear wars, but I've had visions that specifically address that and clearly say that there's rules of war. And the Chinese have already let us know that. I mean,
Sure.
The Chinese have let the Americans know that if they're ever engaged in a conflict, they'll have no other choice but to nuke 200 U.S. cities if it comes down to it. So it sticks to conventional weaponry. Nuclear weapons get involved when the war moves from America over to the Middle East as Russia comes through Syria to try to get democracy and get out Israel out of there. And that's when Israel fires off one preemptive nuclear weapon, and Russia and China both respond to that with their promises of carpet bombing any country that dares set off one nuke. It's too much of a risk. So it's not mutually assured destruction that's keeping them from doing it. It's basically here's the rules. And so that's pretty safe, in my opinion, for Americans. Don't have to really worry about that. And also the missile strikes from Russia in the East Coast were very targeted. They had very advanced weapons that could focus in and blow up a government building on a block that also had civilian apartments, for example, on the same block, and just take out the government installation and cause very minimal harm. So most of those strikes are all military strikes along the East Coast. The chaos comes from people waking up that day and turning on the TV or hearing the radio, and people running in the streets and going kind of postal. On the East Coast, on the West Coast, when the Japanese come in, they're coming in person, in fleets, coming up again as peacekeepers to try to bring order, because again these missiles fall, and in 1 hour's time, once this starts, Americans are all going crazy, running around, driving somewhere, not knowing what to do, totally panic-stricken. And that's where, again, you get that excuse for peacekeepers to come back in and bring order to chaos. And the Chinese will be offering us things: money, part of a new financial system, freedom from the fear that everyone will have been in after a couple of years of war. But they're never really going to take over. So as they invade through California and Oregon and Washington and start to make their way to the Rockies, America is an armed country. Right. And I don't mean our military is armed. Our civilian population is armed. And they're never really going to be able to successfully do that. But they will be able to occupy parts of the West Coast. And that's where you'll see concentration camps. That's where you'll be seeing people, Americans, being given a choice. Do you want to take this new financial system? And this is where you're going to see the mark of the beast. Do you want a little implant that will have $100,000 for you to start your brand new life with if you just agree to come to this new world order? And some people will do that. Some people will be in so much fear and terror that they'll just accept anything. And some people won't, and those people will get thrown into concentration camps. And people in Europe and people in Africa and people that are watching stuff on TV, they're going to be seeing the happy Americans coming out with the Chinese for this new world order of sharing the wealth with everyone. They're not going to see the concentration camps where Americans, especially Christian Americans, who refuse to take something like a microchip in their
They will
hands.
show them what they want to show them, especially when China has more control over the U.S. media.
Right. And then once you're in the concentration camp, they'll retinal scan you for, just like your tag mark. And it's horrifying to what I've seen go on.
Okay, now there's several patterns at play. When a military invades a tribe or invades a country, there are certain things that pop up: rape, sexual abuse, torture, human trafficking. These are some of the things that we've already heard about, stories coming out of the Middle East at the hand of what NATO forces, U.S. forces, European forces have been doing. DynCorp is well known to be involved in sex trafficking in the past, and they've still been given contracts by the Pentagon. Cynthia McKinney confronted Rumsfeld on the fact of this in the year 2006 before the floor of Congress. So, in light of what we have seen in the past, when we know what happens when war takes place, when people are not ready, how big of a factor do you see human trafficking being a problem, specifically trafficking of women to locations outside the United States? How strong of a threat do you think this is?
It's a huge, massive threat. It's not even a threat against enemies of Americans. It's a threat against fellow Americans. So you have to realize, as America, we're going to be sitting here, and sure, an earthquake might pop off over there, or some thunderstorms rip up some stuff over here, but we're still going to stick around. The moment of collapse, especially if it's from missiles falling down, whatever it is, the moment of collapse, that's when people go crazy. we're really addicted to our realities, our money, our cars, our things. If you lose all of that and you're running and abandoning the cities and cars with family or by yourself, there's a level of stress involved that most people don't have a clue about. And people will develop post-traumatic stress. People will see opportunities to steal from one another. People that haven't had for most of their lives will loot and rape and take and steal.
Right.
And in fact, as I recall, the Antichrist, who his chant when I had a vision of him was, give to yourself, above all else, give to yourself. And that's partly what brings the world into chaos, people taking what they want from another. So Americans are their own threat, especially from the East Coast. And I've specifically seen along the Mississippi River Valley is kind of where a lot of those gangs form, kind of like, Mad Max. There's still safe zones, like along the Rockies, especially the eastern side of the Rockies, and it's just God doing his work.
Now, how do you see
He's
Oregon?
just guiding all the people together and that want to be violent towards one region and the people that want to love and work together to another region.
And the state that I'm in, Oregon, do you see anything specific? Of course, we have different regions where we might be facing different challenges. We have the coastland, 60 miles in, you have Portland.
I have not seen everything that's ever going to happen. So Portland and certainly get some disasters. You guys have volcanoes over there. I know there's at least one volcanic eruption that happens. It's actually very civilized. It blows up relatively rapidly. I don't actually know what city it is exactly. I just know it's a major city. It blows up pretty rapidly, but there's plenty of time for people to evacuate. People follow instructions, and it's very, very orderly.
I do want to mention here, as a footnote, that not all of this is entirely catastrophic. There are some people that have envisioned there's a book called Ecotopia, and Ecotopia kind of spawned the idea of Cascadia. Cascadia being a large region of the Pacific Northwest that, in theory, could break off from the rest of the country in a meltdown of the economy, of the government as it currently is. And I think a lot of people would view that as a positive thing. Granted, we could deal with the threat of the Chinese. There certainly are a lot of armed men in this state, and there's certainly a lot of wealth that I believe in the future will be funneled, especially food, out of the state. But I do believe, Leon, I'm blessed to be in a place like this.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, I live in San Francisco, Bay Area. It's beautiful. I wouldn't move just because there's 2 earthquakes coming. I'm just prepared for that and ready to deal and help with my neighbors and get through it.
How do you want to talk about the bigger picture in, let's say, the next 12 minutes that we'll have you, what you feel all of this means? I'll say this. I suspect there is a dark hand that is controlling this whole situation simply to destabilize the vibrational frequency on Earth, as David Icke and many others have talked about. And I can see that hidden hand, that military-industrial complex glove, all over the planet, in Russia's business, in China's business, in the United States. Obviously, a lot of it's spawning out of the United States and Europe. But why do you think all this is really taking place and where this is going to go from here on out?
Well, this is where it's all about spirit and entities and beings and what's really controlling the planet. And as a clairvoyant, one of my specialties is spirits and aliens and demonic forces as well as angelic, but as a healer I'm generally having to focus on these dark vibrations. I really love quantum mechanics and the concept of a super universe and the fact that we live in our own universe and then there are other universes there. As a Christian and someone who sees beings, I name them. So this super universe is what I call God, and our universe is what I call Christ, and another universe is what I would call Lucifer. And so there's different kinds of universes filled with different kinds of energies and forces. Now, there's one or the other. You're either in alignment with the Creator, so you're kind of doing what the Creator's original intent for everything is to be, or you're following something else, whether it be Lucifer or Nephilim or other dark kinds of universes that pierce ours. These darker ones don't respect our free will, and they're also a bit psychotic, and some of them hate God, and so they want to disrespect it in as much way as possible. And when you look back at one of our earliest governments, the Egyptians, and how they set up a system of control to make one or to people king, the wealthy owner people, the gods in their eyes. There's also a time when these beings came onto the planet. So there are very negative spirits, and they're all over the place. It's like nature. You know, in a cubic foot of air, you've got 10,000 microorganisms. In the ocean, cubic foot of water, probably twice as much. Life permeates our reality. It's also permeating these other universes. The only thing to do here on Earth is have a body. We're human beings, so we're spirits too, but we've got bodies, and so we have the power and we experience this reality, and it's the only thing to do here. So if you don't have a body and you're here, you're hanging around people with bodies. That's what we call spirit guides. And certainly an angel that's helping guide you down your life is a spirit guide, but a nasty being that wants you to feel bad about yourself, gets in your head and gives you negative thinking. I mean, they're around. Everybody has this kind of vibration, but it's very organized. So if you look at someone like Lucifer, who's kind of the hierarchical of everything, and then you've got devils and different levels of demons and alien vibrations that aren't in alignment with the Supreme Being, or dark spirits that aren't in alignment with the Supreme Being, they're coming through us. Humans have the ability to channel. Like I said, we're human beings, so you have the ability for your spirit to come and sit in your body and occupy it. You also leave your body every night when you go to bed, and you go to the astral plane and you dream.
Sure.
And then
so,
the next
Leon,
day you get back in.
So the phrase psychic protection is not some new age mumbo jumbo. It's something that we ought to be perhaps looking closer at.
Being able to control your energy, our society doesn't teach that, but it's the energy that we're talking about here, these dark vibrations. If we taught everyone in kindergarten simple psychic tools for grounding their body and bringing their spirit in and separating their personal aura universe from everyone else's, those demonic forces would never have a grip on control. That's why we have a programming system. You know, little kids go into school and they're told what's real and not real before they really hit adolescence and have a chance as spirit to get in their body and bring their own truth in. By then, they've been programmed up the yin-yang, what's real, what's not real. So we do have these a television is an alien technology. It was invented in San Francisco by a man who fiddled around. But I have no doubt that there were alien energies channeling through him, helping him to do that. Create a fantastic multidimensional doorway in everybody's home. People stare at it, and information loops out from the TV through their body and back into the TV, and vibrations can get programmed into people. Certainly, again, it can be used by angelic, good-hearted people by creating shows that are inspiring or amusing, but oftentimes it's used to promote dark agendas and dark vibrations and dark concepts and things that people aren't even aware of it. You know, we talked before the show about Katy Perry's new video, and that's right there. When I heard that extraterrestrial song, it was horrifying because I listened to the lyrics.
Well, let me mention that. I haven't mentioned that on the air yet. We don't have the video to show, but for those watching online, if you watch Katy Perry and you type in E.T., I've talked about Lady Gaga before, ladies and gentlemen. Now we see this promotion of the female being desecrated, the feminine, the goddess image, into a role of a sex slave that's serving some sort of a dark entity, not just man, but something even far darker. In this video, she's romanticizing, she's fantasizing about being raped by an alien. And what do you think this means, Leon? Why are we seeing so much what I would call alien propaganda? Also in the film The Knowing with Nicolas Cage, he gives his children to the aliens that appear to be greys to save them from the world ending. It's strange propaganda.
Well, it is a very strong propaganda, and, I do believe in Illuminati, and whether it's a real group, it's just a word that means something. Human beings that are actually worshiping these beings and trying to control that information. In my visions, I've seen rapture. There are angels that are extraterrestrial in the universe that have ships that can help us and deal with stuff. They follow God and they do whatever Christ says to do. So when it comes to the end of the age, their role is directed by the Messiah. But I've seen them in vision helping us, taking people in rapture, and they may have even done it in the Japanese earthquake. There are more missing people than there are bodies accounted for, and we'll never really know. Sure, some bodies are going to wash up here and there, But in my visions, I've seen people being taken right before the earthquake hit.
Let me ask you this question really briefly. Outside of the Bible, are there any other texts that also talk about rapture as well? I know there are some people hearing what you're saying, and they're thinking that you're a religious nut based on a perception, but I want to hear more about this idea of this potential. I have heard other stories in other texts outside of the Bible mention a similar event.
I'm not, it's from what I've seen. And in fact, some of the stories of where the concept of rapture originated from was a little girl who had dreams of it. And, there's prophecy in the Bible alone that in those end days people will dream dreams and dream of the future. Everything I know about extraterrestrials and beings and entities comes from perception. It comes from having been able to see them. I've had to help hundreds of people get rid of demonic alien influences. And the good guys aren't a problem because they're respecting God, so I don't generally have to do anything, but they will communicate. I've had two specific visions. One vision I'll never forget, sitting in San Francisco at a time when I was a little scared of the earthquakes and dying in it. And it was so vivid, I just thought the earthquake hit, the building collapsed in on me. I felt the pain and the shock. Next thing I know, everything's coming up off me. My body's being repaired. I'm finding myself on board a ship with an extraterrestrial and a couple other humanoid people, and it seemed almost perfectly normal, and I had been saved from that particular disaster. Those disasters, the Japanese vision showed people sitting in their living room having dinner, for example, before a disaster hits and being taken up right before their house is leveled out. Well, and they never actually know that something bad happened. They just never really experienced it. I think a lot of this stuff has to do with your beliefs. And, the people that are going to have the hardest time with the future are the people that are really addicted mentally, psychologically, to the world as it is, and not able to be open to totally change in the mechanics here. And people are either going to have to die. I hate to say it like that. But, think of it like an elderly person, like someone who's 93 and she's seen the world forever and the world has worked a certain way. Her mind may not be able to handle a whole new dimension of life suddenly happening. It might be easier for her to go to sleep, so to speak, and be reborn in a new body where it's just easier to adapt to it. It's going to take a strong mind to be able to accept that the world is really changing, that we're shifting into another dimension of life, and things are different.
Change is always constant.
I've personally been through my 2012 fall apart, and life is much easier, but it's different. Things like money, things that are, so it used to be so difficult aren't. It's just if you're clear in your mind with what you need, the universe is responding to it very quickly, but you have to let go of these old concepts and realities. And for people that don't believe in this stuff, I don't blame you. That's why I've, documented my predictions and had them on the back shelf. They scare me. But then when something like Japan happens where I wrote it down quite specifically, then it comes back out of the burner. And that's when I look at it like, okay, there's more to this. And that's why I watch Japan closely right now, what's going on. If they evacuate Tokyo, that's in my vision. That just would continue to expand.
Sure,
what
there's
happens
something
in
else
Japan is going to continue to unfold.
That probably should be mentioned as well. If we have a massive solar flare, an X flare or beyond, that disrupts the electric grid either worldwide or just geographically in one area, if the coolant systems go down at these nuclear reactors, we will have a massive, massive problem within the United States with leakage, with meltdowns, if we don't have any power to power the generators for the coolant systems. And I find that to be very interesting. Bill, if you can go to that 2012 graphic that shows the sun, the chart going up, in reality, ladies and gentlemen, it's beyond 2012. It includes 2013, 2014, the bombardment of solar particles, solar energy coming into the Earth. The Mayan calendar is one source of information that we're going through a time of great change and the cycle is completing itself. There's also the Hopi prophecies, and there's also talks, theories about a potential second sun. And so there's so many different things going on, but I will say these are very, very interesting times. And these are very challenging times, but these are times that provide an opportunity to do something right, an opportunity to do something not only for yourselves, but other people selflessly, because I think that's what a lot of this is coming down to.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, my final challenge to people would be just talk to Creator. I know I might sound a little bit like a Christian nut, but none of my information comes from organized religion. It comes from perception. I believe in a God and a Messiah because I see angels. I see demons. I know those things are real. When I was 18 and I first saw a demon, the first thought to my mind was, oh my God, well, if that's real, then God's got to be real too. And with that attitude of just believing it was real, I just started talking. So if people don't know what to do about all this stuff, you have God right there. You close your eyes at night when you go to bed, talk to Creator and ask him or herself to make themselves real to you. And just start being open and start asking questions, knowing you're going to get the answers. And if you're wondering about extraterrestrials and the future or aliens, you can ask the Supreme Being about that stuff. Just pray, just talk. I mean, it's not get on bent knees and, I don't see it like that. It's just that you've got a best friend right there who will pretty much answer anything you ask as long as you just know he or she is there, and be open to whatever that is. Because, again, the Christians from dogma religions, when they talk about God, and if you don't believe in Jesus, you go to hell, I don't see God in that space, and that's kind of a big disservice. And a lot of people are there.
Now, Leon, we're actually out of time, but I'd like to have you on again in the future. Again, it's great having you on. What would you like to share with the audience about your website and some information they can access there?
Well, I've probably scared everyone, but I do professional readings.
Not this audience. Go ahead.
And it's ironic because when I read someone professionally, I don't look at your future as it's something that's carved in stone. I see you as a creator. So I look at what a person's creating for themselves in the present and in the future. And if there's any problems, I look at, okay, well, why are you creating that? Let's untangle that. I'm primarily a healer, so people that suffer from depression or different levels of mental, emotional pain, I'm very good at clearing that out. And so you can find me at psychicschool.com.
Okay, and of course there's leonlegant.com. There's some more information about you. Leon, thanks for coming on. It's been great.
Thanks, Alex.